All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Chris Gill here with Come Cloud with us. I've got my wonderful co-host, Abdul. Abdul, how's it going today?
Good, good. How you
Awesome.
doing?
Awesome. I'm doing great, thank you. Weather's kind of nice. Hopefully, we don't get rain, but it's like it is what it is. We were talking earlier, some of the snowballs we call them here in upstate New York, but all this wonderful cottonwood is just finally deadening down, dying out, so I can actually breathe and don't sound like I'm hacking up a lung. But that's me. So, hey, we're here today, though, bringing the wonderful Allie Thomas here. So, Allie, could you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background, please.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Hi. Thank you for having me. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. My name is Ale Thomas. I go by, it's short for Alejandra. I'm from Mexico, and I am a developer advocate at Testkube. At Testkube, we're building a Kubernetes native testing framework that aims to leverage Kubernetes capabilities to give back full control and power to testers in the cloud native ecosystem. My background is in industrial and systems engineering, actually. And before I was a developer advocate, I was on the other side of the food chain as a software engineer. So I'm here to talk to you about my experiences as a software developer that had to go through the unfortunate decision of a company migrating to Kubernetes without knowing what Kubernetes was. So I've learned a lot of things along the way, and I know that a lot of them will resonate with you. So I'm excited to talk to you all today.
Excellent, excellent. So, Abdul, do you have any questions before we really, dive into our session here?
Yeah, let's have a discussion, right? Like Ellie, your role, I see you traveling quite a bit, going talking to people, especially conferences and stuff, right? So talk to us about any recent conferences you've been to and your experience, specifically after COVID. How has the experience been there?
um, it's been very nerve-wracking because I think you got so used to your safe environment during COVID, right? You were in front of your computer 24/7, and then just looking at your cat, not interacting with a lot of people. And that's exactly how I started working. The last two companies that I worked at were entirely remote. And the first one, I did get to gather with them, but the second one at TestCube right now, everything is remote, right? And the first event we had was KubeCon last year in Detroit. So that was very nerve-wracking for me, especially because I hadn't interacted with people in the tech space in person, never, except for my coworkers that I had met before. But it was really fun. It was like learning to talk to people again. And just going out because you don't only get to experience this. I mean, it's one of my favorite parts about these type of event is that you get to interact with people that geek out on the same things you're geeking out,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
But it's not just on a kind of work environment. You also get to party with people that are like you, right? So it was like going out for drinks, going out to eat. That was really fun. So that's probably my favorite part, just getting to connect with people that are just as nerdy as you.
And I bet
Yeah.
it's always surreal to meet people in person because, to your point, we're
Sure.
always chatting, right? So, for example, me and Chris have never met because I live in
Oh, yeah.
Canada and he's in Buffalo or Rochester, New York. So hopefully one day. But
November, hopefully
But
November, if
but
not
aren't
sooner.
you so you're on the west or you're on the east?
So
I'm
we're
on
on the
the
East Coast, but we have a big pool of water separating us. So,
Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
the
but
lakes. Yeah, yeah. So, so to your point, right? That's one of the things when you meet people at
Hmm.
conferences. That's really you
yeah,
get to know them in person and then find out the other side of their personality, not only work. And then
Yeah.
yeah. Um, Also, talk about developer advocate, right? I know this position has been really become a buzzword now. Everybody's talking
Hmm.
about this to
Yeah.
talk. talk about your experience. What does that even mean? And, what do you do from a data activity?
Well, so like I said, I started as a software engineer, but I've always had this passion for communicating with others and sharing what I learned. So I'm self-taught. I went to school for industrial and systems engineering, and I had like two classes that were programming. So those became my favorite, but it was too late to change my major. So I started learning on my own, right? I started learning everything computer science on my own. And I felt very isolated because I was in a different major, in a different environment. And I started finding communities online that centered around learning or, just programmers and stuff. And this really connected with my passion that I already had about, interacting with other people and talking about the things that I'm passionate about. So I continue as a software engineer, but I'm missing this aspect. And I have a background in marketing as well that I did. I've been working as a community manager before, like during college, and I worked as a marketing manager as well. So I think the pieces were there just like separately, and nothing came my way that was like the exact match that I loved, And then I found out about developer advocacy, that is this role that is very community heavy, but also very technical, where you get to talk about your learnings, you get to talk about something that you're really passionate about, which is technology. And actually, Testkube reached out to me because they saw my background in software engineering and marketing. They were like, "Hey, are you interested in being a developer advocate?" And that's how it started for me. On the day-to-day, I mean, it will depend if there are any other developer advocates that are watching me. The role is entirely different from company to company, depending on their needs. But it's pretty much getting to understand your users and your community to see what their needs are, what areas of improvement you have in your product. So based on, you really get to see your product from a user perspective, and you have to put this hat on where you're like, my user would not like this, or my user needs this, So it's a lot of working cross-functionally between product and engineering, and also making content actually for them, and ways that you think that they could use your product and such. So it's a really versatile job. I would say that it's never boring, and that's something that I really like. One day you're coding, another day you're updating documentation, the next day you're presenting to an audience. So it's really fun. I like it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that makes sense, and that actually gets into our segue of your presentation. So
yeah, that was my task for today. So we're at it. Okay, so we're getting started?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So after all of that conversation, hi everyone again. Thank you for being here, and thank you guys for having me as well. Today I am here to tell you why we're building Testkube. I told you a little bit about what it is. Let me just move it a little bit. So that's my presentation. That's my intro, right? So I already talked a little bit about myself. So today I am here to tell you why we're building Testkube, the things that we've learned along the way, and most importantly, why we believe that more companies and organizations around the world should rethink their approach to testing in a Kubernetes environment, and how exactly we're doing that at Testkube through a unified testing approach. So this conversation will be more over a talk about how to test software that's deployed in Kubernetes, not testing Kubernetes itself. So about your apps that are deployed in Kubernetes. So let's get started. So traditionally, software testing has followed a very well-defined path. You focused on monolithic applications that were deployed on static infrastructures, but with the rise of microservice architectures and the adoption of containerization, Kubernetes has become like the go-to standard for managing these containerized applications at scale. So this shift to a distributed cloud-native environment requires a fundamental reevaluation of our testing strategies as well, because our software is no longer as simple to develop, as simple to test, as simple to deploy or scale as it was before. So if we are changing the way that we deploy applications, and we're using new ways to deploy our applications, why are we testing? the old way, right? We're not really reimagining the way that we do testing. So to look more into why applications in Kubernetes require a different approach, I want to take a look at the current state of testing in the cloud native and Kubernetes ecosystems. So you'll probably be aware of it yourself, either in your companies or across teams, or your personal experiences. So you may all be familiar with the fact that the current state of testing in Kubernetes is challenging because it's a very complex, it has a very complex nature and many moving parts and elements that are involved when you're handling Kubernetes and deploying and managing containerized applications. So because of this, testing cloud native applications is just not easy, right? It's complicated. And navigating CI/CD pipelines or workflows that are usually not designed for testing Kubernetes make it even more complicated. So yes, Kubernetes has many advantages. It's amazing for a lot of things, but it also complicates things for us even more. So this presents a series, yeah, that's me. This presents a series of challenges that are very unique to testing applications in Kubernetes, right? You might not get these when testing your applications in a monolithic or microservices when you're not deploying to Kubernetes. So these are some of the ones that I faced as an engineer myself, trying to navigate testing my applications that were no longer available locally, but now lived in a cluster. So I'll talk specifically about some of them and what exactly they entail. So they might resonate for you. So for starters, CI/CD pipelines. CI/CD pipelines can be complicated to begin with, varying from company to company and team to team. But when Kubernetes comes into the mix, and we try and implement a testing system, our CI/CD pipelines get even more complex. So for example, if you have an application that's deployed in Kubernetes and you want to add a new test, I don't know, an integration or an end-to-end test, the first thing you'll need to do is figure out how to give your CI/CD pipeline access to your cluster, all right? So you might have internal APIs that are not exposed for obvious reasons. But if you want to run a test against that API, then you'll have to expose it, either using an ingress controller or giving cluster access to your entire CI/CD pipeline. And in this scenario alone, you're not only creating vulnerabilities from a security standpoint, but you're also putting a developer or a QA through a bottleneck, because this will not have to be done by them, right? This will depend on an operations member or your platform engineer that has to set things up for you. So adding to that, every time you want to run or debug a specific test, you will find yourself having to build and execute the entire thing all over again from the get-go. So that's one of the problems that I experienced. Another challenge is that, oh, did that repeat? Yeah, sorry. I didn't move it in time. So another challenge is that it becomes hard to debug and analyze your test results. So you have multiple tests, types of tests coexisting, right? And you need to allocate a place for your test results, which will become very complicated as well when using different tools. So why is this? Because each tool has their own execution and reporting style, and developers and testers end up having to navigate through pods, scavenging for their logs, right? So it's not easy having access to your logs when you're in a Kubernetes cluster. So closely related to the previous challenge, it's also very complex to store and visualize your test artifacts. So what do I mean by test artifacts? I mean the files that your testing frameworks produce. So for example, some testing tools like Cypress or Playwright, which are used for end-to-end tests, will generate a video recording of a browser that's spun up, or a JSON file that will need a place to live, and that will be crucial, right, to your testing process. So whenever you add a new testing tool to your stack, you also have to go through setting up your CI tool to upload this file into a storage bucket, for example. So that's another thing that needs to be set up either by your QA tester or your platform engineer, or even a developer, depending on the structure of your team. Next up, there's also the challenge of having to navigate through restricted access to testing environments, and this dependency that I already talked about, that comes with having your testers or your developers rely on DevOps or platform engineers to set these things up. And the first example I talked about exposing your internal APIs for testing is a really good example of this, because you'll find yourself sacrificing restriction and making yourself vulnerable to security attacks. Okay, so to summarize, when testing our applications in Kubernetes, we stumble across very unique pain points. So complexity of our CI/CD pipelines, security and restricted access concerns, lack of centralized results and a synergy between the tools we're using, and difficulty to adapt and navigate for those that aren't familiar with Kubernetes at all. So testers will have to focus, testers should have, to focus solely on testing, right? But you're forming this dependency and bottlenecks with DevOps and platform engineers, and you're having your QA tester navigate a pod, which is not fun. So to address these challenges and pain points, separately, there are an entire, testing frameworks and tools that include security testing, unit testing, end-to-end testing, integration, load testing, whatnot, that help us test our applications as a whole, but bringing them together, especially in a cloud-native environment, is the real challenge for us. So what if we started applying the same type of DevOps principles, but on our testing activities, right? Because that is what should make sense if we're following a different software development approach. So let's look at the DevOps methodology through a testing lens, and that way we can highlight the importance of the following practices. So let's redefine the testing approach. So for number one, continuous integration and continuous deployment. So DevOps promotes automation and continuous delivery, but instead of integrating your tests into your CI/CD pipelines and letting them become a blocker in your testing process, if you decouple your testing activities from your CI/CD, you can start working alongside it by abstracting your testing executions and using your pipeline to automatically trigger tests. So instead of it having to be, a constraint, you can use your CI/CD pipeline to your advantage when you put it together with Kubernetes capabilities. So for example, when there's new code changes or new deployments or new Kubernetes events, you should be able to trigger tests. And this ensures that your tests are always up to date, they're aligned with your latest application changes, and of course, they provide you with faster feedback loops. So as we can see in the diagram over here on the left, we see that our CI/CD pipeline looks like when everything is intertwined, everything is sequential, your testing efforts can't be isolated or decoupled because everything is sequential, right? But by removing that dependency, as a QA tester or developer, you'll be able to trigger your tests on demand instead of having to run the entire CI/CD pipeline from the beginning or building your entire application from the very beginning. So number two is test orchestration and automation. So in Kubernetes, you should be able, if you're using Kubernetes, you should be able to leverage Kubernetes jobs to orchestrate and automate your tests. And we are not doing that, right? You can be leveraging these tools that Kubernetes provides to define and schedule test runs and ensure that you're testing and executing consistently across different environments. So this should help us, reduce manual efforts, improve reliability, and make sure that we can execute in parallel as well. And then number three, for tests and results aggregation and management. So DevOps practices emphasize the management of test data as well, and our results as part of our testing process. So you should be able to manage your test data easily and have it available and consistent across different testing environments, and regardless of the testing tools you're using. So I mentioned previously using Cypress and Playwright, or using, K6. So we usually have to set up different, we have to have different setups for different tools. So we should be able to use them all together. And number 4, monitoring and observability, which is something that is highly encouraged by DevOps, right? So throughout the life cycle, in the context of Kubernetes applications, we should be able to analyze and collect metrics, logs, traces, and this would help us hopefully identify and resolve issues quickly during testing, leading to better quality overall. So by combining DevOps principles with our testing activities, we should be able to achieve faster feedback loops, increased automation, and higher application quality. And these practices can greatly help us streamline our testing process. Also, increase or enhance collaboration across teams and ultimately deliver a better and reliable software. So what does DevOps testing look like? So this is what we at Testkube know as Kubernetes native testing, right? So your tests live inside your Kubernetes cluster. That's where they're stored and deployed. They can be decoupled from your CI/CD pipeline. They should be orchestrated in the cluster in the same way you do with your applications, or triggered from events happening in your CI/CD pipeline or from API requests. And your results should be aggregated in a common format that's easy to access by the people who need it most, who are the testers and the developers, right? So by implementing these practices, we tackle several of the challenges that I discussed earlier. And you can also, of course, reap all the benefits of having consistency in your results, of really taking advantage of your teams and testing efforts, and just having better streamlined collaboration across your teams. So how do we achieve this in practice, right? How do we actually start testing the DevOps way and put all these tools together? Like I said, there's different tools that help us do a lot of things and tackle a lot of these issues separately, but bringing them together and into the cloud is the real challenge. So I'll start by covering some of the principles and practices that we follow at Testkube and have worked for us to achieve this unification and making our tests DevOps and Kubernetes friendly. So I mentioned previously what Testkube was, but I'll dwell a little bit more on some of its details. So Testkube is pretty much an executor that helps us do these decoupling from CI/CDs and pretty much just grabs everything you're already using, regardless of what tool you're using. If you're using K6, Cypress, Postman, SOAP UI, regardless if you're testing across front end, back end, end-to-end tests, or performing security testing, no matter the tool, what we do at Testkube is we grab those testing files and that your engineers and your testers are already running, and we execute them for you inside your cluster, and entirely separately from your CI/CD pipeline, so they don't have to run the entire thing, but can run their tests in isolation in an automated way, asynchronously, triggered by Kubernetes events or by changes in your code or infrastructure, leveraging cron jobs and whatnot. So what we prioritize is the use of centralized metrics as well, so we can always find everything we need when we need it, and the format we need it. So how exactly do we do this? We do this by defining our tests. Our tests are defined as CRDs inside our clusters, and that gives us a lot of flexibility. And we use every testing tool is deployed as a Docker image, so you really have no limitation. You're not locked into any vendor, right? You can just put everything together and not have to adapt to anything, which is usually the case when you make this transition into Kubernetes. So I really...
So Ellie, from that aspect, I guess this is multi-cloud, right? So regardless if you're on AWS, GCP, or Azure, or even a public data center, this should work flawlessly then.
Yeah, exactly. And I should actually show you a little bit. I'm going to show you what the interface looks like, just so you see that this dependency that I was talking about, that is formed between your tester and your DevOps engineer, your platform engineer, where you have to set up a whole system for them. This with Testkube, it just turns into your platform engineer deploying or initiating a Testkube in your cluster, and then the tester can just go and do what they're good at, right? What they should be doing, and which is testing. So they just have to test. And let me show you a little bit. Maybe I can share my screen. I'm not sure. We didn't practice this. Let me see. I'm just going to show you what it looks like so you see that it's just very simple. Okay, I think you're going to be able to see it now. Do you see it?
There we go.
Yep, there we go.
Yeah, so the only thing that your platform engineer has to do, or your DevOps engineer, operations manager, or whatnot, is, like I said, install Testkube in your cluster, initiated, and then your tester or developer has access to our dashboard, which, as you can see, it has Cypress tests living here. Wait, did I? Yeah. So normally it should have, you can have your Postman test, you can have your K6 tests, Ginkgo tests for Go testing, all coexisting, and you don't have to do anything separately, right? You just have to access them. They can trigger them from here. They can leverage them or automate them or schedule them by using Kubernetes events and grouping them all together. Your logs are right here. Everything lives inside your cluster. So when you perform an execution, you can see the logs live actually. And then also over here, what I was talking about, the artifacts, we already set it up, and we already set up an S3 bucket. So you have all of that ready. And this one, I mean, Postman doesn't produce anything, but you can see the logs live. So it makes things a lot easier for your testers and developers. They don't have to learn anything about Kubernetes, to actually use it and continue testing in a new environment. So let me show you maybe this one produced some files because it's Playwright. Yeah, over here. And then you just download it, and then they have the report. I was actually looking at one for security testing for Zap. So this is something that you just download, and then, oh, I'm not sharing that window, sorry. But what I'm saying is that you automatically have access to everything, and you don't have to depend anymore on anyone, right? This removes that bottleneck that we have to create, because Kubernetes itself is very, very complicated. So we're not familiar with how to navigate this. And with this, we have had the ability to help a lot of companies and a lot of teams just figure out how to do testing, because some of them even stop doing testing altogether because they're like, no, it's too hard. Like, we're not doing it, but we should be doing it, And I think it's something that it's constantly overlooked on its own, right? Outside of the Kubernetes world, testing is just overlooked constantly. And even more so when you make it harder for them. So that's what we're trying to build at Testkube. We're trying to make it easier and give back the power to the testers and to the developers to not have to depend on anyone to do their job, and just be able to find everything in a centralized manner.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And then people who are coming, I guess, who are really new to Kubernetes, what advice would you have for them? Because as you said, this is a challenging, daunting task, right? To maintain Kubernetes or even learn Kubernetes.
Yeah. So one thing that I've been observing that I think is a trend is that, Kubernetes is just growing in popularity, right? It's like it's being adopted by a lot of companies. And I think one really good trend that we're seeing with companies like Testkube and a lot more, even open source software, is that we are trying to make this adoption easier for people, right? Normally, like I'm saying, you wouldn't know. I was on that position where I didn't know anything, and I was just thrown into it. And you're like, well, figure it out yourself, because now we're using Kubernetes. And I think we're lucky enough that we're in this period where there's a bunch of tools that are coming out that are usually helping us making that adoption way easier. So you might have to be familiar with the terminology and what exactly is a Kubernetes event, or what exactly is, a pod or a cluster, but you don't have to navigate it as much as a DevOps engineer or a platform engineer does, because you have all these tools that are making it easier for you. But my advice is, to just dive into it. And hopefully, yeah, I mean, you're lucky. I think I want to say that you guys are very lucky. We're in a very lucky moment where we have a lot of tools that make this adoption easier for us.
Makes sense. That makes sense. Do we want to go back to the presentation, or are we?
Yeah, I have my
Okay.
closing thoughts.
Okay, sure. There we go.
Okay, yeah. So in conclusion, as like I said, as organizations embrace Kubernetes and containerization, traditional testing approaches fall short. They just fall short in addressing all of the unique challenges that are posed by these dynamic environments like Kubernetes. So it is crucial for us to adapt our testing strategies as well so that they match the pace or the complexity of our applications that are now deployed in Kubernetes. So by doing so, we're not only ensuring that we're delivering reliable, scalable, and resilient applications, but we're also giving back that power to our testers and our developers to act on their own and focus on what they're doing best without having to put more blockers on their paths. So I think this is a conversation that we need to have more often. Actually, when you go to an event, for example, like I mentioned, KubeCon, you might go through the schedule and you will find like one, maybe two talks about testing. And I think that it's something that we really need to be focusing on, and a conversation that we need to be bringing up more to find ways to navigate it and just address it instead of keeping on neglecting it.
Yeah, to your point, testing is always at the back burner. Even security. So talk about
Yeah.
security, right? Because a lot of you mentioned a lot of companies, a lot of enterprises are moving. The fintechs, the financial, so they have high governance requirements or compliance requirements.
Hmm.
So talk about that as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's very important. And finally, well, if you're interested in Testkube, we have a open source free tier that's very flexible as well, and we're open to contributions. We're open to feedback from you guys, and just any comments are highly appreciated. We also have our Discord, and if you want to give it a try, we have a really cool demo up that's like a sandbox environment, so you could also just give it a try at demo.testkube.io, which is the one that I showed you. And yeah, thank you so much.
That was great. Thank you so much. I think we have one question there.
Okay.
It says, can you talk about your tech stack?
My tech stack in general, or at work?
I guess we can talk about both then.
Talk about, yeah.
Yeah. So okay. Well, I started off as a Java software engineer. But when I started at Testkube, I've been doing a little bit of everything. Testkube itself is built is in Go, so that's pretty cool. But we also have to adapt to the testing tools that we use. So I'm telling you, we use Cypress, we use Playwright, we use Postman, and every tool that you can think of. So I'm coding normally with Java as well for JMeter, for example, JavaScript, and Go mostly. And well, Kubernetes and everything else that fits around there. But that's pretty much what we code in on the day-to-day.
Yeah, everybody has a different stack, right? Because to your point, there's so many tools now in open source and whatnot. It's not like everybody using the same tools. So talk to us about the challenges you face, because there's different tools. Obviously, the learning curve is going to be quite steep as well. So yeah. So what are the challenges? Like how do you overcome those challenges?
For learning, you mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think with the current environment in tech, you have to be it's very hard to, stay focused on one thing, and it's very easy to, be drawn to the next shiny thing. But I think the way that I tackle this is I've just discovered that, multitasking is it's not good. You have to focus, go one thing at a time, and that's what's helped me a lot to tackle these challenges. Like I'm telling you, it gets hard because I have to write one day. I have to write tests with Playwright. The next one I have to do Cypress or JMeter, so it's or Gradle or Maven. So I have to be switching from using Java to using plain vanilla JavaScript and stuff like that. But I think mastering the fundamentals has been a key to me overcoming these challenges and being able to just switch and adapt to the next thing, because it's all about the fundamentals, and then adapting to a new thing is fairly easy after that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, any questions from your end?
Yeah, I mean, I was saving this for later, but you know what, we'll just throw it out there now. So for you, are there any meetups or anywhere that you're going to be in the near future that, folks want to come continue a conversation or meet up or learn from you, learn other things? Anything on the horizon here that's coming up in the next few months?
Well, first of all, if you guys want to keep the conversation going, any of you, I'm very open to you just reaching out to me on my social media. That's for one, right? You can find me, and I'm usually very responsive on my mentions. So yeah, you can find me and just talk to me. But in person, I'll be attending a KubeCon later this year. So excited to see and geek out over Kubernetes as well again. So that's one thing that I'm going to be doing. And we're also going to be talking to GitHub and GitHub open source, their open source Fridays. So about Testkube as well, and just testing in Kubernetes in general, and obviously about open source software. So that's always very exciting. And yeah, happy to address any questions. If you guys want to email me or mention me on social media, I am happy to keep the combo going.
Awesome. Great answer. Thank you. Of course, it is. I'm like trying to come up with another answer. I'm just I'm playing around with the demo too, so I'm curious.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Just for I know you mentioned, right? So I'm a little familiar with K6, but just for the folks that might not know, what does K6 really mean to folks? Like, what type of testing platform is it?
So K6 is great for load testing. So load testing is, for example, for simulating a load on your applications to see how it will perform under different loads. I said loads like 13 times, but yeah, that's pretty much what it does. It's perfect for load testing. They have a great documentation as well if you want to try it out. We have some examples also on our blog. We have some examples on our demo sandbox environment. But you can simulate, for example, having 500 visitors to your web application every 10 seconds or every minute. And that way you can evaluate how your software is performing under such pressure. But it's pretty much for that.
Awesome. Maybe I'll ask a little bit of a deeper question. So a lot of the stuff, I assume there's like you could set up gates too, right? For like I go through this set of tests and then another gated process for subtests and whatnot. So
yeah,
talk to us a little bit about that process, just out of curiosity.
So we have something called test suites where we can group tests to perform sequentially. But we also actually our next release this week, this Friday, is coming with something that so you're getting the inside scoop. That called parallel testing. That's called parallel testing. So that's something really exciting that we're very excited about, because it pretty much removes that layer that we had of having to perform tests sequentially. Now we're allowing you to perform tests simultaneously as well. So you might say, okay, I want to test, or I want to perform 100 Cypress tests at the same time. You're going to be able to do that with Testkube now. So we have both of those areas targeted. So for example, to create a test suite, you will have to add labels to your test. For example, you might label them end to end, and then you want to group them and say, okay, now I want to perform all of the tests that have the label end to end. And then you do that sequentially, but now you can also do that in a parallel way. And you can also trigger them based on different Kubernetes events, or saying, oh, I updated my config map, I updated X file, or I got new changes in my code, that it can also trigger your tests or trigger a test suite. So we're really trying to help making automation and all of these things a little easier.
Yeah, cool. You stole my other question. I was going to ask you about triggers, and if we have a configuration change.
Yeah, we do.
You read my mind. Nice job. Abdul, any other questions do you have? I don't see anything else coming in our chats here. Again, we'll take a moment to
Left them
thank
speechless.
everybody. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this wonderful content to our viewers, to the session. I learned a lot. Hopefully our viewers enjoyed this as well. So thank you all for tuning in. We'll pause for another minute or so, maybe a little chit chat, just to see if we get any other questions from folks. But this has been a pleasure. It's been an awesome session. Great content, great stuff. So thank you for your time.
I guess the closing question for me would be, where do you see Kubernetes going, and then Testkube going with that?
I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think we are reaching that point, that trend where we're going to see a lot more tools that are just going to make things easier for us. Right now, Kubernetes is dreaded, right? In the industry, it's like, Kubernetes is so scary, or Kubernetes is so hard. I think we're getting to a point where it's going to be, we're closing that, what's the word, like breach? I don't know how to say it. Like that learning access, I think is gonna lower that barrier. That's the word. I think the barrier is lowering in the upcoming years, and I'm seeing a lot of people that are shifting to this area in tech. So that's very exciting. I think there's a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of room for improvement, of course, and I'm excited. I think we're gonna see some really cool things coming up. Testkube is one of them, but there's a lot more coming that I'm excited for. I think the landscape's pretty promising.
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be more challenging with security and other tools, and we'll definitely hear more with KubeCon coming. So yeah.
You guys are gonna be there? Are you guys gonna be there?
No.
Oh. Okay.
No, I have other folks that they're definitely stoked to go to. A bunch from the UK that are shared friends through our MVP program that are definitely heading to KubeCon too. So I'm excited. Yeah. It's always fun to see what comes out of it, especially the security ones. Those are cool.
Yeah. Hopefully more testing stuff too.
Yeah.
That's true. Exactly. Yeah. So with that being said, I guess I don't see any more questions, Chris.
Yeah, no. But again, I think it's more of a, maybe everyone's just digesting too. It's
right.
It's a lot to go through. But
I dropped the bomb. Yeah.
No, you did a great job with it all. So again, thank you.
Thank you.
And
thanks so much
for viewers. Yeah.
And, thank you everyone for watching.
We'll see you next time. Again, make sure to hit that subscribe button, please. Share with all your friends, and we'll catch you next time on Come Cloud with Us. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.